In the last lesson, we finished up by creating our push state method. I'll go ahead and add the commas where necessary here. Now that we've successfully added a new record to the browser's history, we need to listen for when the user clicks the back or forward button. And as we've learned, we use the pop state event to do that. So we'll do that right here within our init method. We'll create a method to handle this, and we'll call it handle state. And we'll say listen for back or forward button. Now I'm going to come down to the bottom and we'll create that new method, handle state. And within here, I'm going to add our event listener, window.on pop state. This is how we can do it with jQuery. With regular JavaScript, you would do window.addEventListener pop state. With jQuery, we can do window on pop state. And when that event fires, we will execute this callback function. And in this case, we will simply say get our viewer object, and once again, we're going to apply the template. Now this is the thing worth noting. We have hooked into when the user presses that back or forward button. Now, just as we did right here when they clicked on the anchor, when that button is pressed, once again, we're going to trigger that method apply template. And then once again, it's going to get the template, attach it to the data, and then place that into the DOM. Now, a couple of things here. Remember, the apply template, that needs to receive a node or an object in this case. And that way we can reference the various things that we need, like data.title, data.href. And if you remember, when we saved it with the push state method, we saved it like so. So we already have access to that. So now we're going to apply the template and we're going to pass something a little interesting here, e.originalEvent.state. So for the time being, when that event fires, I want you to see this. We're going to console.log e. Once again, I'm going to reload the page, and it looks like we have an error, has no method handle state, and it looks like I left off a closing e. So I'll add that again and try it one more time. There we go. Now I'm going to click a link. I'm going to click back, and now we have logged the event object. And I want you to take note here, though. If we look through here, I don't see any state object available. And that's because in this case, we are using jQuery. And what jQuery does is it will normalize the event object so that it'll work across Internet Explorer and other modern browsers. But when it does that, we sometimes don't have access to some of these new APIs. However, this is not a big issue because jQuery always gives you access to the original event. Take a look right here, original event. And now that'll be identical to what you would normally get even if you didn't have jQuery. And now if we come down, we see state. And I need to remind you of this. State is right here. When we call the push state method, we save some data, and that is the state. That is saved as the history's state. So now that object should be equal to this. Let's make sure. I'm going to come back and state, and now we have the href, the title, and the URL. So once again, let's try this out. I'm going to click on HTML5, now WordPress, but now I want to click back and go back to the HTML5 state. Click back, and we haven't executed the transition yet, but now when I look at the event and I come down to original event and state, we now have access to the necessary information to display that state on the page. Now, a couple things here. If I uncomment this and I reload the page, remember how I noted that Chrome will execute the pop state event when the page loads. And the problem is, you'll see that we get this error right here, cannot read property title. And that's because when the page loads, we haven't saved any state. So you're trying to access the state object and there's nothing there. It's equal to null. So why don't we say if e.originalEvent.state, if that is not null, only on that condition do we want to call the apply template method. Otherwise, it's probably just the initial page load. Let's save that, reload, and now we're no longer getting that error. Good. So let's click HTML5, WordPress. I'm going to click back and check it out. Now it's working. This is the history API in effect. So once again, I want to try this again. I hit HTML5. Now we're on this new page. But remember, that's not a link unless you attach that to your server-side language of choice and make this URL respond accordingly. Then I'll hit WordPress. Then I'll hit Best of Touch. So now we have two new records here. And remember how I noted that they both say history API, but in the future, it will use the second parameter of push state to specify what that title should be. So ultimately, in the future, title will be equal to HTML5 rocks if that link is clicked, or WordPress is great. And then that will be displayed in place of these history API, which is the generic title. So anyhow, I'm going to close this out. And when I click back, we should filter through WordPress and then HTML5. Click back, there's WordPress. Click it again, there's HTML5. Hit forward, now we're gonna go back to WordPress. Now we're gonna go back to Best of Touch Plus. This is exactly how to use the HTML5 history API. So the final thing is, we do not wanna execute any of this unless the browser supports the history API. Now, if you are using Modernizer, you would do if modernizer.history. However, if you're not using Modernizer, you can either memorize it or you can use Modernizer without even bringing in the library. You can simply refer to the source, and that's okay as well. Why don't we go to modernizer.com and we will go to download, and I will bring in the development version. And now I'm simply going to look for history. There we go. There's a test that's been tested. It's going to work. So I'm going to copy that. And here, to test for HTML5 history support, we search for window.history. But that's not enough because remember, the history API has been available for a while. We also want to make sure if it has access to the push state method. So now, right up here, we can replace this if window.history and history.pushState. Only on that condition should we execute this code. And that'll do it. If you do want to provide a polyfill, you can refer to some of the techniques that we covered in the polyfill episode. It's pretty much the same process for every feature. And that's the HTML5 history API.